stigmatizing somebody is a form of discrimination. Stigma is discrimination too. Right? So when it can be worse than illness when we do it in that way. So again, mental health problems. Remember what I said, it's extremely common. 1 in 5 Americans, you did it here, right? And that's 1 in 5 in the workplace. So I'm going to talk a little bit about where things come from. How many of you are familiar with adverse childhood experiences? Good. Now, I don't want you to think about them with your clients. I want you to think about them with you now. You. Yours. How many you've had, right? And this study, this is what and this study actually started in the 80s. There was a doctor who was doing a weight loss program, right? If you remember, and when he was doing an interview afterwards to see if they successfully met their goals, many of them did not, and many of them, almost 3/4 of them, had abuse histories. And he goes, wow, that's interesting to me. So then he started looking at that, and then it eventually turned into a medical insurance Kaiser Permanente, and the CDC came together to start the biggest research study of its kind. They took a look at, over time, over years, they took a look at these 3 different types of adverse childhood experiences: abuse, neglect, and household dysfunction. And they looked at how many of people had these in their childhood, and then what happened to them as adults. What happened to them? So physical, emotional, sexual abuse, physical and emotional neglect, or in their household, did they have any mental illness, anybody incarcerated, mother treated violently, substance abuse, or divorce. Now we know today there are other kind of adverse child experiences, right? We know. The people that went through the recent active shooting I did, that's an adverse experience to them, right? How many children are caught up, like in New Orleans and Houston, and flooded? Can you imagine losing your whole home, right? And that's an adverse, that's not up here. So all those things can be considered adverse experiences. So if you start thinking of that, then it gives yourself a number. And that number correlates with these things. It correlates with how health, your behaviors, and life potential. So depending on how many number of ACEs or adverse child experiences you have, you can see what it goes up. What goes up is the risk for negative health and well-being outcomes. I grew up in eastern Pennsylvania. I grew up in a Mennonite culture, old order Mennonite, much like Amish, right? And part of the culture, kind of unwritten culture, is that adolescents and teenagers in that culture will go wilding, right? Well, my dad, when he was 16, he became a member of a Harley-Davidson gang. He got a Harley, and he was driving around. And my mom was with her friends on the side of the road. Their car broke down, and my mom and all 3 of them got on the back of somebody's motorcycle. My mom got on the back of my dad's motorcycle that day. And that evening, I was conceived. And by children, 16. They were 16, right? Well, what was interesting is my mom came from the bad side of the tracks. My mom's side of the family was excommunicated from the Mennonite church. My mom, I remember my grandfather, my dad's dad called my mom a Jezebel. Right? Weren't allowed to get married in the church. Had to wear a purple split because she wasn't pure. Right? And I found out not too long ago from my grandmother, just before she passed away, that I was almost adopted out. I didn't know that because nobody thought my mom could take care of me. They didn't know, right? So what ended up happening through my childhood, I was raised by my grandma. I love my grandma, my Grammy. She's speaks Pennsylvania German, that didn't speak, I was raised in that way. I was the only one of my siblings with this experience, right? And they kind of put into me that my mom's not a good mom. That's why we got to do that. So I never trusted my mom. I never trusted her. And I'll just make a long story short. When this study came out, my mom asked me to sit down and meet with her and said, "Are you familiar with this study?" I said, "Yes, I am. I use it with clients." She goes, "Well, so am I." And my mom said to me that she has more than 5 aces. My mom said that I have 8 aces. That's how many. My mom, I won't go into those. But my mom that day helped me understand something that I didn't know about her. I reconciled with my mom that day. I realized something I didn't know before. I love my mom today. My mom became a counselor for and worked with clergy abuse victims. That's what my mom did. She was very good at that. Right? And she clearly has a mental health. And I'll tell you, 2 of my aces were growing up with my mom. My mom didn't want to live at different times of her life. She attempted suicide, I don't know, multiple times, but 2 times I stopped her. 2 times a little boy named Randy stopped her. His mom, taking her life. Those are aces I have. So I had to go through treatment. I was in family therapy, right? And I remember one day in family therapy standing up. I was about a 6th grader. And I remember standing up and saying to the therapist, "You got to stop my mom from killing herself because I need my mom. I need my mom." Right? And the therapist looked at my mom and said, "Well, which one of you is being the parent right now?" And again, it's important to understand we all have a story, right? We all have something. And it's important to understand that. And people who we work with have a story. And that story puts us on a mental health continuum, right? It puts us there. We don't have to have a clinical diagnosis to be there, right? To have those things, but some of us do.